Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Claire Robinson. I'm the Customer Relationship Manager here at KRC. Thank you all for joining us for our monthly Agile webinar. Today we're holding a DSDM Clinic with Keith Richards, who was the lead author for DSDM Atern. Next month we're going to go back to basics with a webinar we originally delivered last January called Understanding Agile, Mastering the Basics and How to Move Forward. This was one of the most popular webinars we've done this year, hence why we're giving it a second outing. So if you know anyone who's just looking into Agile or perhaps just embarking on an Agile transformation, please let them know about this one. This will be on Friday the 25th of January at 12:30 again. If you want to access any of the previous webinar recordings, you can do this on our website. That's at AgileKRC.com. Just click on the Resources tab and then click on Webinars. You can also sign up for next month's webinar on that page as well. So I'm shortly going to pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards, but just before I do, let me point out a couple of the features of the control panel, just in case this is your first time using the software. So if you have a look at the top right-hand side of your screen, you'll see an orange box with a white arrow inside. You can click on this to maximize or minimize your control panel. And if you'd like to ask a question, just type your questions into the question box and Keith will take as many as he can at the end. If you could get your questions coming in as soon as you can and throughout the presentation, that way we can gauge how much time we need to leave at the end for questions. That'd be great. Right, I'll now pass you over to your presenter, Keith Richards.
Thank you very much, Claire, and welcome everybody to another webinar. It's a full year and we've had tremendous success and the numbers grow every single time. What's always very pleasing is looking at the international spread. We get a lot of people from the UK, Europe. Just some name checks for some people that are coming through on this one. We've got somebody from the Lebanon, we've got people in Argentina, Lagos, Nigeria, and also places like India and Australia. Hope you guys are enjoying the cricket out there in India, because it's certainly very, very exciting. So let's get on with the DSDM Clinic and have a look at some of the problems you may be facing, and also the style of this is going to be slightly different to the normal webinars, that we're going to let you ask questions and I'll try to solve them in this webinar. In terms of where we're going, in terms of the structure, if you like, at this clinic, imagine you're in the waiting room. I'll just set up a few present-day facts about DSDM and DSDM in the real world, and some of the main problem areas to try and perhaps grow some seeds in your mind about what problems you might be having as well, just to give you some ideas about the questions you might want to ask. To finish with, we'll just do some latest news on where DSDM is going at the moment, because it is quite a fast-moving area, and just to give you an update on where things are and where DSDM is going in 2013. Okay, just by way of introduction, a sort of apologies to those regulars that they've seen this slide before, but we've got lots and lots of new people as well. So KRC is very much a pioneer in training and consultancy company in Agile. We don't do things like everybody else. We try and be a bit different. We try and lead. And this is one of the reasons for DSDM being upgraded in 2007, actually. We specialise in all things Agile, particularly DSDM, and we try and focus on improving Agile at large scale. Myself personally, I've been doing this for about 15 years now. In fact, before the word Agile was invented, and I'm a director of the DSDM Consortium, so I'm going to be a big fan of DSDM. But also in 2007, when I think DSDM was falling behind, I suggested that we upgraded it and was the lead author. And that took about 15 months and a lot of hard work. And I sort of, with a collaborative team of about 40 people, we came up with the latest version. The latest version is called DSDM Atern, and it's really just a version number, the word Atern. It comes from Arctic tern in terms of a bird. It's just something the branding people said we needed to do. But I think future versions might just revert back to DSDM in, as I say, maybe midway through 2013. Don't worry if you call it Atern or DSDM Atern, but I'll probably refer to it as DSDM all the way through this presentation. The book I wrote was Agile Project Management, published by TSO, a great example of trying to get something in on time, and I was very fortunate to be awarded the Most Valuable Player at the Agile Awards in 2011. And so hopefully I know what I'm talking about, and hopefully I can help you with some of the problems you might be having over the next 40-50 minutes. So just a little bit of present news on DSDM and a little bit of a history lesson. Won't take long on this one, but it was launched in 1995. A lot of people don't actually realise that. It is a bit of a hidden gem. It grew very, very quickly in the late 90s and then stagnated around 2002. And the main reason for that, in my opinion, was the fact that the consortium at the time wanted to protect the method and create what was called a club. So you had to be a member, you had to pay quite a lot of money to join the club to get to the IPR, or the intellectual property, to get to the method. Meanwhile, everyone else in 2002, with the advent of the internet, just decided to go open, and other models, for example Scrum, grew a lot more quickly, and DSDM quite simply got left behind. So the method, and this is where I was leading the team in 2006, 2007 and a bit of 2008, the method was updated in 2007, and one of the funny things about the whole exercise was just to see how fundamentally solid the actual method was. I often call it the engine room, but when you look at the engine room and you go right into the detail of what DSDM actually is, it was a real surprise to me that what had been created in 1995, before I came on board or had anything to do with DSDM, is still correct in 2012. Quite simply, I do think it is amazing. I think you could quite rightly say it was ahead of its time. The concept, or the thing that was happening in software at the time, was the idea of moving to GUI screens, graphical user interfaces, and prototyping, and the need for a new method was there. And I think when we've got into the real the stronger parts of agile development now, in the last sort of decade, suddenly DSDM, if you like, has had a second coming. And so much so that APMG have adopted has adopted DSDM as their Agile Project Management approach, and this is what they're trying to get people accredited in, and it's their latest, if you like, one of their latest products that they sell, and it is actually the fastest selling product that APMG are shifting at the moment. They're an independent accrediting body who do accredit quite a few products, and as I say, Agile Project Management is their fastest moving product, and in fact APMG won a Queen's Award to industry because they're one of the fastest growing companies, I think, in the export market in the UK. So what I'm trying to say, and there's a lot of people who are on this webinar filled in the registration question, you're all in the DSDM area, apart from about 8%, and this is fast moving water. So I'm kind of saying you're in the right place. It's just we've got to try and do it. We've got to try and do it well. So what about DSDM in the real world? How easy is it? The registration question we asked you was more or less how are you getting on with your DSDM, and if you want to write these figures down just so you've got a feel for the audience today, 8% are not actually using it, so there will be some information for newcomers to DSDM in this webinar. The next figure really was those that are not doing very well was 49%. So half the people listening at the moment are not doing too well with their DSDM. And again, I'll help you with why that might be in a moment. 31% said they're doing okay, but it could be better. And 11% said they're doing well. So well done to that sort of 11% who are getting it to work. And the reasons why we've got such a varied set of figures there is because DSDM, once you understand it all, it's like anything in life, it's easy when you know how. Some ideas in terms of DSDM are quite simple and very easy to pick up, like the Moscow prioritization system, where things are either must, shoulds, coulds, or won't haves. Some ideas are a bit complex. There's something called IRC timeboxing in DSDM, investigation, refinement, consolidation, and it is a little bit of an art and a science, that one. It's not for everyone and it's not for every situation, but some people get tripped up on this and can't understand it and have problems. There's some ideas that are actually counterintuitive, and one of the best bits about DSDM is when it makes you work in a counterintuitive way and do things that you wouldn't normally do. And the classic, which sets it apart from a lot of agile approaches, is the idea that you might actually do a could have, namely a lower priority piece of work, before a must. And these ideas seem almost like heresy, but actually you can get a lot of power, and it's quite a powerful and very effective way of organising your work, certainly in a project context. Some ideas fall foul of the fact it's more a cultural thing. So DSDM might be very good, you might be doing everything correctly, but there's just a culture at your organisation where collaboration is seen as something that we're not particularly good at. You might have a lot of baggage or a lot of history. So again, DSDM in the real world looks at these situations. And another one is what I call an incorrect implementation. So in other words, somebody has put in DSDM, but there's 48 documents, and really we've just got a document-driven bureaucratic process. So when you're looking at your problems, and this is why in this clinic style I'm going to try and answer as many as I can, is have a look at the source of a lot of these problems. Is it that the method's a bit difficult at times? Is it just a cultural thing at your organisation? And funnily enough, it's the bottom two that cause the most problems. I do think there are bits in DSDM that are complicated, that are difficult, but funnily enough it's more culture and how you implement it that can cause a lot of the problems. One big problem also, and I don't really wish to do a almost blatant plug for training, but this is what training is all about. When we train an organisation up for 3 days, we can go through all the traps you might fall into, and what's the good way and what's the bad way, and a lot of it is to correct, if you like, those counterintuitive things. And it's like anything, skiing, playing golf. If you get some lessons, you can understand what you should be doing, and then work on it over a period of time to get it right. So I'll now take you through some of the areas of DSDM. So this will be good for the newcomers on the webinar, but also it'll show a source of where some problems might be for those that are trying to think up some questions that we can take at the end. So firstly, it's worth actually saying what's actually in DSDM, because it's made up of about a half a dozen sort of areas or components. So it's got an overarching philosophy and set of principles. It's got a life cycle. It's got some products or documents that you produce. It's got roles and responsibilities, who does what. It's then got a set of techniques. And it's also got something which is, in inverted commas, called other guidance, more like a body of knowledge. So this is the areas of DSDM. DSDM isn't just one document or a flow chart. A lot of these things come together to create the method. So I'm going to go through all of these now and show you where you might be finding problems, what are the easy bits, what are the hard bits. Now the first thing I want to pull out with DSDM is something called the principles. The overarching philosophy and principles of DSDM are enshrined in those 8 statements there, and these are, if you like, a set of behaviours. And what you've got to realise about these behaviours is they're not documents, it's not a flow chart, it's not a checklist, it's an attitude, it's a state of mind. And importantly, your organisation has got to encourage these behaviours, and if you want to put a single point of contact, we're talking about the project manager needs to make sure these are happening. A simple tip for you to help and try and understand where you might be with these behavioural side of the method is to just traffic light these 8 principles. So in other words, red means they're not happening, amber or yellow or orange, whichever you call it, means it's sort of kind of might be going wrong, and green means it's okay. Have a look at your project, traffic light those 8 principles, and just see where you are. Now it's very important to realise that if you get a couple of reds or a few yellows, it's not a case of that's a little bit of an irritant. It means it's a massive problem. Any red is a massive problem, and you need to manage yourself out of those problems, because DSDM works in a certain way, and if you enact these behaviours, you can get to what 11% of the people on the webinar have, and that is a very well run and executed DSDM projects. In terms of the life cycle, again, this is an area, a source of problems for a lot of people, because the diagram, which is affectionately known as the cheese and pizza diagram, and just about everyone in the DSDM community talks about cheese and talks about pizzas, it's not as easy to look at if, or not really, it's not a really intuitive diagram that you think, well, what happens next on my project? This isn't a flow chart. And one of the reasons for this clinic and this webinar is really to not necessarily slay a few myths, but this is actually a difficult diagram to get your head around. So if anybody looking at it has been doing DSDM a while and they're not quite sure what this is trying to say, well, you can join a club of quite a lot of people. What it is trying to say is that in the cheese you do feasibility and foundations, where you get your upfront work all sorted that sets you up for going into time boxing. The two pizzas there, exploration and engineering, plus the deployment box, which is sometimes called the pizza box, this is really a manifestation of time boxing. Once we have understood where we're going, we break the project down into increments and we crash through this using time boxing at a low level and at a high level, which we explained in the last webinar. But first things first, this isn't really a flow chart, so don't think it's a flow chart. Certainly don't think you go through 5 phases on a DSDM project, because you don't, because you flick between exploration and engineering quite a lot. What we try to do in the training is try to get people to understand their more modes or settings. So you're either in an exploration mode or you're in an engineering mode. And as I say, this diagram can cause quite a lot of confusion, but at least part of this webinar is to make you feel a bit more comfortable that some bits are pretty easy to pick up, some bits are not so easy. Another thing that is often misunderstood with DSDM is a look at the product set. Now the products, there are 17 products in DSDM, and this is a picture from the DSDM pocketbook. And again, people misrepresent this or misunderstand it. They feel it's very left to right, waterfall, linear, document driven. But the truth is, you don't need to write all of these documents. And most implementations where we're involved with our customers, we can often get away with about 4 or 5 or even 6 documents. Don't get me wrong, we can never get down to 0 or 1 or 2. You've always got to have some documentation. But again, this picture gives a little bit of an over heavy, potentially bureaucratic feel. But again, when you see something called an outline plan, if you look at the blue box there out of feasibility called an outline plan, the fact of the matter is that could be half a side of A4 or half a sheet of paper. Another day, another project, it could well be 4 or 5 pages and some pretty complicated models or diagrams showing dates and timelines. But when we talk about a document or we talk about a product, we have to do what is, how I say, it's got to be fit for purpose. It's a bit like driving a car. When you go up a hill, you pick the gear that is appropriate for the hill. You're in 2nd gear because it's a steep hill and it's very slow. It may be you're in 5th gear because you're on a motorway. Or if you're in America, you're probably driving an automatic, so you're okay. But the point I'm trying to get to here is you scale this to fit. So don't be put off by 17 products. Funnily enough, in some organisations, 17 isn't enough. In most organisations that we deal with, it's over the top. But it's there to be dipped into and use what is appropriate for your situation. Now what we have here is the again, affectionately known, the standard term for it is actually the space alien. It's known as the space alien, but I hear so many people refer to it as the alien baby or the snowman. But it's the roles and responsibilities diagram. And I think this is quite a powerful part of DSDM. It does bring a lot to help you scale up your Agile projects. Scrum is very light on roles. You have a Scrum Master, a Product Owner, and everybody else. What we're talking about here in DSDM is if you take the head of the space alien, which is up the top there, this is very much project level roles like the project manager, business sponsor, technical coordinator, who's the, if you like, the guardian for the technical solution, the business visionary looking at high level, wider impact of business issues. Whereas down here you have the team, which has got the team leader in the middle. This would be no different to a Scrum team if you're using Scrum. And if you've got several teams, you'd have several bodies. But this is the key role in DSDM called Business Ambassador. This is where you find out exactly what the detail is, and this person is helping you with the Moscow. I think DSDM scores well in the Agile space here, better than a lot of methods and approaches, because you get a more blended view of the customer or the business. From our experiences, we find that a single product owner, a single contact, is all well and good as long as they are good. Often it's a single point of failure. So I think this is quite a powerful area, pretty easy to adopt, pretty easy to pick up. You don't necessarily have to use those exact names. You could say SME, subject matter expert, if you like. But whereas the two previous diagrams I've said are maybe a little bit of a turn-off at times, I think this one is really very good, and it's quite a powerful area of DSDM. And a lot of people are just using the Space Alien to help scale up things like applications of Scrum. DSDM also comprises of 5 key techniques. So I'm just going to list them and sort of tell you where you might be having some fun or where you might not be. But facilitated workshops are not as easy as it looks. Getting in a room and getting consensus and being very creative and getting a decision, that's not as easy as it might look, but they can be very, very powerful. It's an incredibly powerful technique for moving quickly with high quality information. They are not cheap. They are, as I say, they're not cheap, so it's something you need to run very, very carefully. Modelling, and we've done a webinar on modelling, is something I find is very underused and very underrated. People tend to use a lot more documentation than they should, a lot more text-based communication. But the fact is that we often talk and think in pictures, and therefore if we could move to a lot more visual systems for communicating, understanding and processes, this is really quite powerful. This is why DSDM promotes the use of modelling. It doesn't matter whether it's Visio or PowerPoint or whatever. It really does press this. And again, in all the customers that KRC deal with, we find just a complete general trend of a lack of use of modelling. It's almost as if drawing pictures that are low tech is somehow not quite right or quite childish. And also we also find that some of the heavyweight modelling techniques like UML or use case, a lot of people struggle with them and then end up not doing them. There are so many people I know who've been trained in UML, the Unified Modelling Language, and then 3 months later nobody's using it at all because it's just too complicated. Moscow prioritization is a very good example of something that is very easy to do, very easy to understand, but does everybody understand the bigger picture? So being able to Moscow requirements and decide what a must is, and the classic rule for a must is the thing won't work without that one. That's what a must is. But when you engage with the business, they often say that everything is a must, but they don't realize what the point of the Moscow system is. And the point of Moscow is to try and get your projects in on time and protect quality. If we're on time with quality protected, we're going to be in a good place. Another technique promoted heavily by DSDM is the idea of what at KRC we call prototyping. The more formal name is iterative development. But often DSDM is seen as a prototyping method per se. I think that's unfair. Prototyping represents 3 or 4% of the method. But again, it's one of these things where people see prototyping as just proof of concept and have we got it right? But the reality is it's a conversation piece. If you can build prototypes and use it to have a conversation with your customer or the business, it's extremely powerful at adding to the communication and reducing the documentation. Having said that, you do need to be very careful with what I call early solutioneering. It's very tempting to be very early into the project, start to create partial builds of the software. What about this screen? What about that screen? What about that report? If we take engineering, non-IT situations, or in creative agencies where there's no IT, it's very easy to go straight into the solution. What you need to do is hold back. You need to do your homework in the feasibility and the foundations, and then this idea of prototyping is more about refining the solution rather than trying to identify the problem. don't try and identify the problem with prototypes. It's not a cool way of working. You could use it in some situations, but my general advice to you is to try and avoid it. And the classic is time boxing. Most of you, if you're working on Agile, will be time boxing or using sprints. And it is a bit like riding a bike, very easy when you know how, but in terms of riding a bike, you often fall off a few times, graze your elbows and scrape your knees. And it is quite tricky because it's quite brutal. Most people in their first 1, 2 or 3 time boxes struggle. They find it painful, but this is all part of learning. Again, this is where mentoring or offline support can help. I often get calls from people going, we're in the 3rd time box and it's blown up again. What do we do? And the simple fact is just, be honest with yourself. What's caused it? Is it estimation? Is it the fact you don't quite know what you're doing? Just try and find the root cause. And time boxing is very good at forcing you to find the root cause and understand, what your condition is. There's something in DSDM called IRC time boxing, investigate, refine, consolidate, where a time box is broken down into 3 cycles. So if you had a 10 working day time box, you might have a couple of days at the front called investigation and a couple of days at the back called consolidation, where you tidy up the loose ends. Now, what we do at KRC is try to train and educate everyone into what this is and how it could be useful. But quite often it could be more complicated than actually useful. So first off, we just try to get you to do straightforward time boxing, get a 10 days worth of prioritized work done in 10 days or 20 days, however the length of your time box. But we then try and get you to understand how we could build and structure that time box differently, so we, if you like, go through 3 cycles. So we front load a lot of exploratory work. Dealing with an engineering company up north recently, and they were almost by accident spending 2 or 3 days mocking up models and should we do it this way, what about that, is that going to work? And what they were accidentally doing, and absolutely nothing wrong with it at all, was, if you like, an investigation work at the front of the time box. Then the bulk of the time box would have been spent building what they were trying to build. But another important thing about this structure, which I want you to be aware of and use it if you think it adds value, is the idea of a consolidation period at the end of 2 or 3 days maybe, whereby we tidy up loose ends, we maybe drop out things that aren't going to make it. But that way of working, where we have a review point not to the end of the time box but near the end, means we've got room to tidy up. At the end of a sprint, you often have a sprint review if you're using Scrum, and it's then that you get all the big bits of news about what needs doing, and there's nowhere to go then. You have to incorporate that into the next sprint. Now, I talked about what's called other guidance, and there's other areas that you'll find in DSDM, and this is growing all the time. And it's really what's called a body of knowledge. So if we take something like risk management, for example, DSDM doesn't want to reinvent the wheel, and that is the expression that's often used, don't reinvent the wheel. Risk management is well documented in 101 places, so all we would do in DSDM is show you how to manage risk in a DSDM context. For example, not complying with the principles represents risk. There's something in DSDM called the PAQ, the project approach questionnaire, where you'd go through your project and have a look at what the risks of using Agile on your project actually are, and then manage those risks. Again, most people we help and audit and mentor and health check in DSDM, most people aren't doing this thing called the PAQ. It's a really simple tool. It's freely downloadable from the dsdm.org website, but it adds a lot of value. It gets you an upfront assessment of the process you're using on your project. What you then do is evolve it according to your organization. Don't take the standard one, evolve it. You may have some of the customers that I know on the webinar we might be based in Chicago, Pune and Great Britain, or Norway and Pune. A lot of people are in different places on different time zones. Again, one of our customers at the moment is on the, I'm trying to get me east and west right, is on the west coast of America, also in India, and also in Great Britain. And things like time and such like are incredibly difficult to manage. Now, in terms of a body of knowledge, what you can do is find there's lots of information around on the internet, and some is covered by DSDM and some isn't. So DSDM has got no problem at all with user stories and thinks they're a great idea, as I do too. There's no problem with using burn down charts if you want to show your progress that way. But again, these are just techniques that you can clip into DSDM or not as you feel appropriate. But there are some things that aren't in DSDM yet, something like BDD, Dan North and his behaviour-driven development. That strikes me as a pretty sensible and interesting technique to look at, but it's not covered in the other guidance of DSDM yet. Now, will it be in 6 months' time? I would hope so and expect so, but again, it's not in there yet. Again, detailed information on using things like planning poker, the estimation game, using points. There's no detailed information in DSDM at the moment, but again, this should grow and should be incorporated. But this idea of a BOK, a BOK, a body of knowledge, is something that DSDM is growing all the time, but at the moment it's predominantly more structured around the life cycle, the products, the roles, on the principles, and being more general with the guidance and techniques. But as I say, we don't want to be reinventing the wheel with DSDM, so that's why it integrates quite happily with a lot of other well-known Agile approaches. Now, in terms of where is DSDM going, latest news, just brief bulletins and brief headlines, and have a think about what questions you want me to have a go at answering. I've got some coming in which I will get on with, but get your questions in now, because remember, this is free consultancy. I'm not going to suggest I'm going to solve all of your problems in one answer, but you never know. If you don't ask, you don't get, as the saying goes. Now, in terms of latest news, there is a new version of DSDM coming up, but it's only a slight modification, only an adjustment, tweaks. There is actually a new role, the Space Alien that you saw earlier, and I've just got a message from Claire to say that actually some of the detail of those roles was quite difficult to see on the screen. But if you just go on to the DSDM website or look in your existing literature, there is a new role called Technical Advisor. It doesn't dramatically affect anything. It's a 13th role, and it's if someone at the detail level has detailed technical advice. A good example in software might be a UX designer, someone who's very good at building user interfaces. So there's a new role. The business analyst role has been, I think, enhanced. In the past, it's always been seen as a team-level role, but many people in the membership of the consortium thought, hang on, the BA is a little bit more than that. So it's also working at the more higher level sort of project level role. So, for example, a BA could be involved in dealing with the business case, not just sorting out detailed requirements. A bit more, there's some new pocketbooks coming out from DSDM. One particularly brand new artifact is something called the Agile PMO, the Agile Project Management Office, talking about how to be an Agile PMO, as the title suggests. Again, this is a pocketbook available from the DSDM consortium, and the existing pocketbook is being upgraded, to include things like the new role and such like. So there's minor enhancements going on at the moment, but the way DSDM is now going is to be a little bit more evolutionary. It's not really changed much over the last 5 or 6 years since the release of DSDM Atern, but now, in response to the way Agile is moving at the moment, there's more things in the post. And one big thing that's changing is membership. The, if you like, last vestiges of the club idea we are trying to strip down, and there's going to be a low cost of entry model being adopted very soon by January 2013. Anybody on the DSDM mailing list from dsdm.org would have seen that information. And just to give you a quick summary of this, and I'm not trying to sell you anything, I'm just trying to tell you what the new prices are. But to be what's called a community member for an individual is now, and these are UK prices, but £50 sterling. If you're a small company, SME of less than 100, that's small to medium enterprise, then we're talking 100 quid, £100. Large organisations are £300 and a charity at £100. Now this is a complete change from the original model because it was seen more as a blocker than an enabler, and just thought let you know that these new prices are there. The sort of benefits you're looking at is training vouchers to get discount off training, discounts in general to events. I think if you're an individual and you can say something like, I'm a DSDM community member, I think it looks good. It looks good on a CV, and there will be logos that you can put on your website or CV or whatever, and you get better access to the method and more information really from being a member. One important thing about membership, and this is what got me into DSDM in the first place, was it's very much a collegiate feel. The method is created by its members. It's not created by a bunch of clever people or academics or a private company trying to sell something. It really is a membership created method by its members based on best practice. So I'd say to anybody listening, if you've got an idea or you don't think the method's right in certain areas, then get in touch. It's your method, and we can evolve it as a community and try and just become, if you like, a centre of excellence for best practice. Right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand back to Claire very shortly, and I'm going to start looking at the questions coming in, and they're coming in thick and fast. I will answer as many as I can. I can't guarantee I'll answer them all, so if anybody does miss out, I'm truly sorry, but it's mainly to do with the volume that we get. So I'm going to hand you back to Claire now just to go through one slide, and then I'll come back and have a look at the, I'll get ready for the questions that are coming in. So Claire, I'm now handing over to you.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, just to repeat what I said earlier, if you've got pen and paper there handy, the next webinar, which is called Understanding Agile, Mastering the Basics and How to Move Forward, that's going to be on January the 25th, same time as today, 12:30. You can download today's slides, and I know the quality hasn't been great on the screen today. We will look into that, but the quality is good if you download the slides from our website. Just go to AgileKRC.com, click on resources, click on downloads, and you can find all the slides from our presentations there. So the next public scheduled courses, the next DSDM public scheduled courses are the Agile Project Management course, which the next course during the week is on the 14th of January. And that's in London. And we've also got a weekend course running in London. That's on the last weekend of January and the first week of February. So do get in touch if you're interested in either of those. We offer in-house training and coaching, lots of other things. So get in touch if there's anything that we can help you with, including an agile assessment, or perhaps you want someone to come in and do a project health check. So do get in touch. So I'm going to pass you back to Keith now, because we've got quite a few questions and we'll take as many as we can.
Thank you very much, Claire. Right, I'm going to go through as many as I possibly can, so I won't waffle and just get straight into it. Question from Matthew. We're looking to support both Waterfall and Scrum as development methodologies with a single project management methodology. DSDM appears to be aimed specifically at Scrum development and may not be applicable to Waterfall. Would you suggest that two different project methodologies are required? A great question, and also the longest one. All the others are shorter. But my short answer to that would be to not go for two different methodologies or anything. I would, you've got to be careful, you've got to know where you are at the moment, but it would look to me that DSDM would be an option whereby DSDM could give you a lot more structure for scaling up Scrum, because Scrum is a delivery technique, and also DSDM would lighten up your waterfall approach. There are some projects that need to be a bit more waterfall than others, and at KRC we have something called the Agileometer, where we assess every project from this one is tending to be a bit waterfall to this is tending to be a bit full on agile. But one thing, Matthew, you really got to be careful that you don't confuse is the levels at which these methods operate. And Sonia's got a similar question in this area, and that is, if you can imagine three layers, three levels. The top level is about governance, project governance, which is where Prince and DSDM fit very well. The middle layer is about project management and bringing together how different teams are operating. And the bottom layer is the delivery layer. Now, most Agile only works at the delivery layer. Scrum is not a project management approach. You can use it on projects, but if you want something, if you want a project methodology, you have to have something bigger than Scrum. So my advice to you is, from what I can see on that question, I think you'll find if you just go straight down the DSDM route, I think you're going to find that ticks a lot of your boxes. The one thing I don't know is your exact situation, so with that element of caution that I might need to look at whether you'd blatantly go down the DSDM route or in a slightly more covert way, but I think you'll find it would be your first port of call is what I'd recommend. Sonia's talked about how would you fit this life cycle in a Prince2 framework. There is a download from our website. The book I've written on Agile Project Management is all about integrating Prince2 with DSDM. It flicks Prince from a traditional waterfall looking method into an Agile method very quickly. The fact is Prince is not a waterfall method per se, and it's not a bureaucratic method per se, but when you move to what's called scope tolerance, you need another way of working, and there's not a lot in Prince on this, so switching to Agile is very easy if you bring in the, as I said, the DSDM framework. There's a white paper from the DSDM website, from our website, on how to do that. I think it's our most common download, people looking at that particular thing. Radha, you're talking about, does DSDM recommend UML? It doesn't recommend or not recommend. It says very clearly, use the modeling approach that works. Now, if the audience all understands UML and it's between the developers and it works, then go for it. You need to look at what method works. But one thing I would say, and this is the reason for the clinic, is from my experience, a lot of people get confused and tied up in knots with UML, and therefore what actually happens is people end up only using one or two of the UML diagrams because they're the ones everyone understands. So there's nothing wrong with UML, and DSDM recommends using whatever works, whatever is appropriate. Next one, I've got something from David here. How do you assign items from the PRL to specific time boxes? Do you do this one time box at a time or plan out all time boxes? David, this is to do with levels, and what you find is what we call at KRC boulders, rocks and gravel. You'll find that there's very high level requirements in the early days, and you might just assign these to general increments. Yet when you get down to a 2-week time box, you're probably with detailed requirements. So with a sort of rolling road way of planning, you need to make sure that your big high level requirements, and some Agile methods call them epics, are spread out across, say, a 6-month project, whereas you're looking at the detail you're looking at the here and now right in front of you in the next 2 weeks with sort of detailed requirements. But you wouldn't be doing detailed requirements 6 months in advance. So what I would do is, yes, I would assign requirements to specific time box, but you've got to remember that time boxes work at different levels. There is project level time boxing, increment or iteration level time boxing, and there's the low level development time boxing, and you need to put the right level of requirement into the right box. What have I got here? I've got a question from Zan, and it says, do you have to know DSDM to understand you're using Prince2 with DSDM? No, there's a lot of information in there that goes that helps you explain what DSDM is, and even if you don't call it DSDM and you're using workshops or you're using prioritization with or without Moscow, I think you'll find a lot of that information will be quite helpful. Another question from Zan actually is whether these books are available on the Kindle. I have to say I have no idea. Try and contact the DSDM website on those. Oliver's got a question. How does DSDM's view change control in the traditional way? And I think I think this is a little bit like a mindset, a behaviour. It depends how you were trained in Prince, but often Prince is quite resistant to change. It sees change as bad, whereas Agile and DSDM in particular sees change as good. We might be coming up with a more accurate solution. Now, the key to this change is really more a case of what kind of change is it. If the scope is moving, or in the UK we call this the goalposts, if the goalposts are moving and really the whole fundamental reason for the project is actually not quite right, then this would need to go through change control. But in Agile and in DSDM, smaller change the detail, we're quite happy to do that on what's called a trading basis. So if someone comes up with a new requirement that's 5 days work, as long as we can trade out something for 5 days, we can do that very, very quickly. And I hate giving away slightly, I don't know, delicate messages, but you can do this on the fly. You really could, if you've got the business ambassador in the room with you and the developers and the testers and the engineers, if they're all sitting there going, yeah, this is fine, let's do it, you can do detailed change extremely quickly. Now, there's nothing really, Oliver, in Prince that actually says you shouldn't do that anyway. It's just there's this whole aura or feeling of change control, and all change has got to be controlled. But the truth is, it's the level of control that's the most important thing. How much governance do you need? Does it need to go to the steering board every single time? This is why I find that DSDM and Agile are more what I call change friendly, whereas traditional approaches have almost got a reluctance to change ingrained. Now, I am stereotyping slightly, which I don't want to do, but that is what I see. I see some people with Prince put in with very flexible attitudes to change, but I have to say that's the exception to the rule. Now, Virginia, I've got a question for Virginia saying, could you please explain the difference between the role of a Scrum Master and a Project Manager, both working in the same project using DSDM? Now, in simple terms, a Scrum Master is what DSDM would call a team leader. They are in charge of a time-box team that's delivering something. A project manager sits above that and will be responsible for managing several team leaders or Scrum Masters. So if you had 3 teams, A, B and C, they would all have a Scrum Master or team leader. Sitting above that, you'd have 1 project manager. Now, that would be a typical scenario for a reasonable sized project. If, however, you've only got 5 or 6 people on a project or on a piece of work, or it's a business as usual piece of work, then really the project manager and the Scrum Master sort of morph into the same thing. It would be 2 roles, but it's 1 person. But the key thing is that a lot of Scrum is what's called anti-project. It doesn't really recognize a thing called a project. It assumes all the upfront work has been done. That's why you start with the backlog, and all the governance and stuff above, and often it's called that, is all in place. This is why a lot of people turn to DSDM to scale up how they're working with Scrum. Scrum works very well in what I call business as usual, enhancements, modifications, where you can prioritize things purely on just merit, really. But when you're working on a project, prioritization is a lot more complex. There's a lot of dependencies, and this is why if you have several teams, you need something sitting above it. And I do have to be very clear, at KRC we warn people against the concept of Scrum of Scrums. I think I've seen it almost work a couple of times, but I've seen it not work more times than I can remember. So if you want to get your Scrum to scale, put something across the top called project management. Now, where you get that from is up to you. You might have enough disciplines that can do that anyway. It might be that you're using Prince, but DSDM is an easy option there. It just sits, it's got the same culture and sits across the top of your development teams quite happily. Right, I'm vastly running out of time, so I've still got plenty more to go through, and I'm just having a look to see which ones. I think we're not doing too bad. I'm going to go with Simon's question now. What techniques can you use to encourage an organisation to embrace collaboration, where traditionally they have not had to engage at that level? Simon, that is a massive question, really, because when you're working on a project, be it Agile or not, whether you work in an adversarial or collaborative way, it makes a massive impact on how you operate. Do the supplier and customer work at arm's length, or do they work, with a handshake? And I don't mean they've got to sort of hug each other and everything, but really for Agile to work, you've got to be collaborative. And I think that's more a cultural thing. And what I would try to do would be to get key people in a room, maybe for a day, and just ask them, do they want to go down this route? Do they want to become more collaborative? What's in it for them? And it is quite simply the what's in it for me factor. Can you get backing from higher up the organisation to move move to a more collaborative way of working, because you don't want to be the person going up tide. So I think when you say how do you get people, or what techniques can you do, I think it really is a hearts and minds situation where get the right people in the room, see what the problems are, and see if a change in mindset would solve the problems. That is, it is a very big area you're talking about there, Simon. So I'd love to say, do this 30-minute exercise using post-its, but you're talking about what I call a big ticket item there. Right, having spent ages talking about being on time, we've come to the end. I'm sorry for those that I haven't got to. I've honestly tried to get to as many as I can, but as these webinars grow, we get a huge amount of questions and a huge amount of input from everybody. So it's just for me to say, wherever you are in the world, I know some of you are just getting up, some of you are going to bed. If you're in the UK, it's around about lunchtime. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend ahead. And thank you very much for joining our webinar.